Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sage Live, November 2021. If this is your first time to attend a Sage Live event, I want to congratulate you for making the time to join. What is Sage Live and why attend it? Sage Live is a monthly online event held on the second Saturday of each month. We feature topics that are of interest to students who have attended camp, either Sage Camp in California or the Summer Physics Camp organized for New Mexico and Hawaii students. Back in September, we hosted an alumni panel, and then last month, representatives from 6 national labs of the Department of Energy talked about internship opportunities at their labs, internship opportunities and programs for high school students and college students. Just to give you an outlook for what's coming up next, in December, we have a speaker talking about different STEM-related career paths at the national labs, whether you want to go all the way to PhD level or you want to join in after 4 years of college. There are different pathways and different twists and turns along the way. And then in January, perfect follow-up for today's session is how to prepare for an interview, because that's what you get when your resume gets picked for an interview. All right, I will now introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Erin Coley, who is the manager of the Workforce Attraction and Recruiting Teams at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. And Erin manages a team of 9 professionals. In addition to being a hiring manager herself, Erin is also a recruiter who advises many managers on how to find the right people to fill open positions in their departments. Erin has over 20 years of experience in her field, which includes working with interns, new college grads, and all the way to executive level candidates or applicants. For today's Sage Live, we will start with Erin giving us an overview on the subject of resumes. And please feel free to type any question that comes to mind in the chat section, so she can address them along the way or save it for the Q&A section, which will happen in about 30 minutes. After the Q&A session, Erin will come back and take us through 2 case studies, sample resumes from high school students, and what changes she recommended to make them better. So she'll do a before and after. I know that Erin loves talking about this topic, so be ready with your questions to make today's session interactive. Erin, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, guys. I'm super excited to be here. I have been able to be a volunteer for Sage, I guess, since I joined SLAC about 3 years ago. So thank you. I wasn't able to do quite as much this summer just because it was super hectic and busy for my team and for me, but I'm so glad to be able to be here today. I'm going to start with sharing my screen and the presentation. Loy and I tested this, but as you guys always know, things don't always go quite as the way you want them to. So please be patient. If hit the slideshow button again. Okay, are you guys seeing my slideshow? Just one slide? All right, thumbs up. Yay. Okay. So, I kind of took notes as you guys introduced yourself, and it sounds like the majority of you are in a place where we're really kind of beginning the resume process. And so this is perfect. There's quite a few slides. You guys will get copies of these. There are some live links in there for examples. I will also include the copies of the examples that we'll look through. And so there's a before, a track changes, and then an after track changes for the 2 case studies that Loy mentioned. Please do feel free to add things in the chat. I may not be able to see them, but I know both Michelle and Loy can jump in and make sure I address something if it's in the moment, or if not, we'll certainly cover it at the end. All right, so, as we were discussing earlier, what is a resume? It's really your summary of your qualifications. It is your marketing tool. It should be a living document. It's your tool to get you in the door. You know, Loy mentioned, yes, I'm a hiring manager too. I'm a recruiter. And the first thing you do is you look at somebody's resume. So that is sort of the indication. Do they match the needs? And I'll say this again, and I'll repeat it. It is not a, oh, I've done my resume and now I'm done. This truly is a living document that you will edit, hopefully for each job, and then certainly as you grow in your experience. So when, you know, to get started, you want to brainstorm your experience, all the accomplishments. This is not just, oh, I got paid for a job, and so I'm going to include that. It can include all of your extracurricular, your organizations where you volunteer, different skills that you may have gotten from classes, from clubs. And it will, you know, one of the things you do want to do is sort of categorize your experience, put things in different areas. You also, as I said, you know, this is a targeted document. And so first you start with the basics, but then before you submit, you also want to research the employer, understand what they're looking for, read the position description carefully. Those are the kinds of things, if you have things that match, that's what you want to highlight. If you know somebody who works there, or if there's a representative on the website, feel free to reach out to them and ask questions. In terms of the organization, the way I think of it is, at the top of the page is the most important, and then as you go down, it becomes least important. Now, sometimes everything's important, but top of the page is always the most key and critical. And of course, that's your contact information. I am sometimes shocked. This actually happened within the last month where I looked at a resume and the person did not have their name on their document, nor their email address, nor their phone number, no way to get in touch with them. Now, most resume or most applicant tracking tools, which is where you apply, you have that information. But if I want to share something with the hiring manager, Michelle's been one of my hiring managers before, I want her to be able to have that contact information. So that's key and critical. Make your name big and bold. Always make sure ease of use. You know, is this an easy font to use? I already covered this. You know, make sure you include your address. You don't have to give your actual school, but maybe the city and town if that's relevant, your phone number, your email. And think about, wait a minute, is somebody going to call me? What does my voicemail message say? You know, there's one that you have for your friends, and then you might want to change it for now if you're looking for a job or hoping somebody's going to reach out to you. So it's a little bit more professional. And think about email addresses too. To be very honest, I have an email address that's called EC Jobs. So Erin Coley Jobs, and that's one that I often use if I'm looking for a job. I don't use my other one, which has lots of numbers and weird symbols. People don't know what that is. So you want to make sure that your email address is professional as well. You can include your LinkedIn profile information if you have it. Now, for the folks today, you know, in terms of you may not yet have one, and that's okay. And so again, this is a living document. You may build on that as you go later. If you do have a blog or a website, you can include that as well. And think about, you don't want to put your social media, you don't want to put your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your TikTok, any of that. But if it is public, you do want to make sure that if an employer goes to look at it, that they're getting the best of you. So do think about that in terms of what you put up there. So your resume is your professional summary. And so we'll look at it later, but often folks will include sort of a summary right after your contact information is a summary. So you want this to be a concise statement, who you are, overview of professional background. And this is where for every resume that you submit, your professional summary may change because this should be emphasizing the skills, knowledge, experience that are relevant to the specific job that you're applying to. So if you're applying to a job that requires lab skills, you're going to talk about that. If you're applying to a job that's a little bit more administrative, you're going to talk about that. So you want to make sure in your professional summary that it really is tailored. And really focusing on the key aspects that show you are a fit, again, for the specific job that you're applying to. And so here are a couple examples. Engineering student with excellent communication and interpersonal skills with a GPA of 4.0 seeking a mechanical engineering student position with Los Alamos National Laboratory to apply and improve on honed skills, coming with strong PC and CAD design experience. So likely the position asked for CAD, is mechanical engineering, so it's very tailored. Another one, self-motivated computer engineering student with team working abilities and great communication skills. Again, this is tailored. Interested in an engineering student position with Los Alamos National Laboratory, coming with solid knowledge of, these obviously are relevant for the job, digital logic, analog circuits, and hardware implementation. So this is very specific. If you don't have them, then yours may not be quite as specific. If the job is looking for digital logic and you don't have that, you might say an interest in learning about digital logic, analog circuits, etc. Okay? So don't get too worried, especially, most of the folks today are high school students. When we look at the examples, those were also high school students too. So education coursework, you do want to include that, especially if it's relevant. So listing your school, major, minor if it's relevant, anticipated graduation date, your current cumulative GPA. Now let's be realistic. Granted, it was a long time ago, but I was a college student. There's your GPA in your major and your GPA in general, and those two maybe don't always match. And that's okay. And so if it is a targeted major, then you can go ahead and list your major GPA as an alternative. And in a separate section, you'll list the relevant coursework. And I made that bold specifically because if you have taken a class on marketing, and this is not a job that's related to marketing, an employer doesn't necessarily want to see it. So it's not relevant. It might still be interested in a different section, but you don't want to, it's not going to be at your top, or it may not be for this position. And then if you do have any projects or if you participated in any publications, you'll also want to include that. And so this is just an example of sort of the education that someone listed. And, can you guys see my mouse if I'm highlighting? Okay, good. So, this person has listed the coursework here. Now, this is also, again, most relevant at the top to least relevant. So if the job asks for Java, then guess what? That's going to be on top. So that's where I can't stress enough how you want to look at each resume before you submit it. And it may say the same thing, you just reorder it, and that's okay. And so any professional experience, so this is your work experience. You do want to list things in reverse chronological order. So most recent at the top to later. And each entry should include the job title, the company or organization name. And if it was, March to January of March of 2020 to January 2021, you would list that, and you can spell out January. You could use the number 1, however you prefer to do it. Consistency is key though. You want to make sure that whichever you pick, if you decide to write January, then you would write out March. If you write January and then you do MAR for the abbreviation, it should be consistent. So if you want to go with your abbreviations for space, then go back and do Jan for the other one. If you want to do the numbers, 1, the first month of the year versus the third month, whatever you want to decide to do, be consistent. bullet points are easiest to read. And so stylistically, a lot of people use bullet points. Later in the presentation, there's a host of resources of where you can find sample resumes. You got to pick the one that resonates with you. For what we're talking about, I'm saying bullets because they are easiest to read. But again, whatever you select, just be consistent and it'll be fine. You know, Loy mentioned, yes, I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I look at resumes and some I like, and some I'm like, I probably wouldn't have selected it. But if it has the right information and it's easy to read, it doesn't matter that it's not in my preferred format. I'm still going to judge it accordingly and pass it on. Meaning send it to the hiring manager or select it for an interview. So your bullets, you know, what you did, what skills you used and developed, what tools you used. So if you are using a specific program or application, you want to list that. And I think what sometimes people forget is to sort of the results. It's not just, you know, what did you learn from it? Especially when you're first starting out and you want to show growth, it's critical to include that. What were the results of what you did? And, you know, back to what I said earlier, you want to list your bullets in order of importance. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily, oh, well, when I first got there, I did this, and then 3 months later, I did that. Whatever's most critical, most important, most relevant, that would be the one that's higher up, if you will. And you want to use action verbs and be consistent with tense. I took a AP English my senior year in high school. And I remember that was one of the things that I walked away with. My teacher was very keen that everything be in the same verb tense. And so you don't want to have past, present, future, all in the same paragraph. It's very confusing. And then people don't understand, are you doing this now? When did you do this? An easy thing to do is make everything past. You might choose to make your current job, position, experience present tense, and that's okay. Or you can just make everything present tense or everything past. But when you go back and forth, it makes it very confusing for the reader. And, you know, if you notice on a position description that they talk about something and you've done that, we'll use that exact language that shows that you're really attending to what they're looking for. And so here are a few examples of some bullet points. Tutored 10 undergraduate students in algebra and calculus 6 hours per week. I'm not going to read each one of these. Conducted habit-based bird monitoring program designed to provide population trend data. So these are really specific. Organized and implemented a two-day fundraising event that raised over $5,000 for a local homeless shelter. Again, very specific, very understandable. Hopefully that'll help you as you build your own. So these are the resources that I mentioned. These are all, so when you get a PDF of the slides, these are all active links that you can look at, information of resumes. You know, here's some fonts. So all sorts of resources that you can use. And always, you know, look at resumes in your field. You know, Indeed is a great source to just, you can look at people, you can look at jobs and kind of see how people are characterizing it if you're for the area that you want to look into. We recruiters use that as well. If I'm writing a new job description that I've not written before, I often will go and look at how other people characterize it and then, you know, not recreate the wheel, if you will. And so there are some optional sections as well, relevant skills. So you might list a little bit more details than just specific. So if you've done similar jobs, you don't want the job to read exactly the same. So maybe you'll add a relevant skills section. any professional, school, associations, conferences, your volunteer and community activities. Remember, especially, most of the folks here in high school, you may not have had 3 jobs to put on your resume, but you probably have some really great volunteer community activities, and those are incredibly relevant too. As an employer, when I'm looking at intern resumes, when I'm looking at new grad resumes, I want to see that they've done internships. I want to see that they have things beyond, just going home and doing homework and watching TV. And then any awards, if you participated in science fairs, math competitions, any of that, you want to include those as well. And so common issues, when I heard, who was it that shared this morning? Lisa shared that she's a freshman at UC Berkeley, I'm like, oh, that was an example I used. When you're first spelling it out on the acronyms, actually spell out University of California, Berkeley. And then beyond that, you can just use UCB or, however you want to abbreviate it. Again, paying attention to past and present tenses, qualifying activities and outcomes, if at all possible. Remove unnecessary details, the subcategories of an organization. You worked at this department, I'm going to use Michelle as a great example. Within her organization, she has many different layers. Really, on somebody's resume, they're going to say they worked in facilities and operations, and the fact that they worked at a specific department may or may not be relevant. So you don't necessarily need to do that. And I can't stress enough to use consistent formatting. It really makes it easier for somebody to read. So here is the question section. I see something in the chat. Let's see if I can read this. Oh, somebody had to leave. Nope. So I've also included my contact information if you guys have specific questions beyond today. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can all see each other. And you guys feel free to come off mute if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them live. There are no dumb questions. Do you recommend we create a LinkedIn account? To be very honest, I would say yes. LinkedIn is used as the sort of gold standard for professional associations and for professional. So yes, and to be honest, I can share that there are times where I look at who has applied to a job and I'm not happy with my candidate pool. And what do? I go to LinkedIn and I try and find people. So if you're there, I can find you for an intern job, for an entry-level position, even if you haven't applied, and see if you might be interested. So yes, I recommend you create a LinkedIn account.
So Erin, it's Michelle. I'm just going to ask a question and maybe you can provide some insight. I know that you've had a lot of experience with different companies. So how important is it to research the company or the organization that you're applying for? And how do you do that? What do you actually look for when you're researching an organization?
Great question. And you want to try and find out as much. So, given we're talking about SAGE, I'm going to kind of hone in on sort of science, right? If you're applying for a company and there's a specific lab, if you can find out, drill down into the organization and find the lab. I know a lot of academic institutions certainly have specific lab pages or department pages. Find out what you can, often they'll say what's key and critical coming up. And if you can show that you've looked at that and that's addressed in your resume or in your professional statement, interested in learning more of XYZ that was on the website, that's really important. It shows me as somebody reviewing that you're really interested. Now, the reality is you can't always get that, right? The organization barely has a website. It's a startup and there's nothing there. Then you can't, there's nothing for you to do. but the more you can find out about the company, the better. It shows you're really interested.
Erin, I have a question. I heard that in some places, they get so many resumes that the recruiter only spends three seconds to just shift through and find who the right candidate is. How true is that? And how do you get around that? Or how do you make your resume stand out?
So I think, so how true is that? So I have worked for organizations that are in the 15 to 2,000, right?
You mean number of employees?
A number of employees, yes, thank you for clarifying. Once you get to larger of that, to be very honest, a lot of companies, their applicant tracking tool, the tool that you use to apply, if you don't have relevant keywords, nobody is going to see your resume. And the people that do, you truly do scan. And it's, do they have what's relevant to this job? If it is I'm going to just, I don't know why biology seems to be very easy for me. I used to recruit for neuroscientists at my last job. And so, you know, if somebody talks about they have some neuro experience, that's going to jump to the top of the page. If they don't have that experience, that doesn't mean I'm going to say no to it, because you do review who your candidate pool is, but anybody who has that relevant experience, and you can see that in a quick glance, are the ones who are going to get attention first.
This is Anna Lebec from Los Alamos National Lab. I want to bring up that for internships at Lana, like in particular high school internships, the process for hiring is mentor driven, right? So for students, that it is very important that you figure out who would you like to work with. And that already gives you a heads up. You can contact the person in addition of submitting your resume and everything through the student programs and so on. But if you already have this first contact, then this mentor is gonna fish your resume from the big pool. The student programs is not the one that, I mean, they do their job and try to identify students and send it to the relevant people, but it's very mentor driven. So do your homework, identify that group, that person that you would like to have an internship with, ask them if they don't want to hire a student in the summer or whatever, ask them for who else can they suggest that you contact, right? Leverage that response from this person from inside the lab. And yes, we check your social media. So remediate damage, do damage control. If there are things in your social media that don't show the best of you, do some cleanup ahead of time.
Yeah. And, you know, I personally, and, you know, I have a LinkedIn account and it's tied to my job, right? I have a Facebook account and it is truly private. Nobody, I mean, if Michelle tried to go to it, she's going to see my name. She's going to see a couple of pieces of info and that's it. So, you know, I keep picking on Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. Or Scott or Loy or whomever, like it's not tied to Slack. It's not tied to any of my employers. So I really try and clamp that down so that if I'm showing a silly photo of me in a light that maybe an employer wouldn't want to see, they'll never see it.
I have a question about how you like figure out which things are the most important regarding college. Because I personally have a lot of activities that were cut off because of COVID. I'm sorry about all the background noise. I unmuted and apparently the
That's
world
okay.
has the noises. Yeah.
We can barely hear it, so don't worry about it. Always
Okay, I'm glad.
it does to us.
So how would you, based on like the pandemic and stuff, order things on a college resume?
So I have to first say I'm not a college admissions person.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm giving you my flavor of things, But if you can try and connect with somebody who that's really their field, they'll probably be able to give you better specifics. But the reality is everything has changed with the pandemic. So it's not, you know, you started, and I'm going to just make it up, in a soccer league that then got, you know, canceled because of the pandemic. That's, everyone is probably in a very similar situation. So don't worry about that. I would say, you know, if you are applying for a program that's specific to science, you want to highlight your science and anything that you've done, and highlight, you know, even during the pandemic, I still continued with X, Y, and Z. So, you know, you might have just the program that you participating, you weren't able to come to Slack or to one of the national labs, but you participated virtually and you were still able to take the kits that Scott and his team sent you and build all the great experiments. And, you know, you have that to show and to demonstrate. And that is huge, that you didn't just sit around and play video games during the pandemic. So, you know, focus on something relevant and show that where you were able to pivot your activity to a virtual space.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we go to the live examples?
Erin, I also wanted to bring up that when I look at a resume and someone has been sticking on a certain activity for a number of years, that shows persistence, right? This person didn't give up. It doesn't matter if you're not state champions in volleyball, right? But teamwork, persistence. I mean, think about the things that you put in your resume. What do they tell about you, right? Science fair, it doesn't matter if you didn't win the state championships or whatever, right? You know, did the science fair every year, and, you know, and things like that. Just try to guess what that fact tells about you. And I think that will tell you what shows you in a good light, and what kind of message conveys to the hiring agency. Do you agree, Erin?
Absolutely, yes. It's funny when you said that, because I've actually, you know, not in my current role, but in my past role, I would interview a fair number of new grads, right? They just finished college and they're interested. And one of the questions I ask is around teaming and how do you partner, you know, and often I would get somebody who shared with me that they've been in volleyball for the past 4 years and what they've learned over that time and how they've had to adjust and shift. And that's a perfect example of what we're looking for with persistence, with teaming, with flexibility. So absolutely show those, highlight that longevity.
I also want to add that one of our managers at Slack, she was looking for someone kind of, you know, mechanical engineering kind of a background, but this is for an internship, and they were not necessarily mechanical engineers who were applying. This one particular resume, the applicant wrote in the resume that he spent a lot of time in the garage doing woodworking or fixing cars or whatever. And the manager just zeroed in on that and said, I want to interview that person because that shows grit, you know, even though maybe the academic qualification is not there yet, that all that years of experience of tinkering and then based on interest mattered a lot. And so that resume was the opening door, and that person eventually got the internship at Slack. So to Anna's point, something that you have done, maybe you discount it, like babysitting or cooking or gardening or running or swimming in the case of running. So how does that lead to this job, to this activity or internship that you're applying for? Maybe there's something that's not obvious. Think about it.
A lot of skills are transferable. You may not think about it, but they really are.
And Erin, if I could make another comment on that, Anna and Lloyd bring up some really good points on, you know, when you're in high school and you're putting together a resume, it may be a little scary because you feel like I don't have a lot to add on to, this piece of paper. It doesn't have to be long. 1 page is fine. And you have a lot of qualities already. I mean, by the mere fact that you're here shows that you're curious, you're interested, you're driven, you have initiative. So when we talk about doing homework, when you go to, you do your research about the organization or the company or the group, you can find out a lot about what's important to them. You can glean a lot of information on what do you think their values are and what do you think are important to them. And then you can think about the things that make you unique, special, stand out, things like resiliency, things like initiative. How have you demonstrated that you're able to take initiative? How have you demonstrated that you're reliable, that you'll show up and you'll put in, an honest effort in everything you do? Employers appreciate resiliency, dependability, initiative. And so there are things like Loy was saying, maybe it was a sport, maybe it was an activity, maybe it wasn't a volunteer event, but you can certainly highlight those things that draw out your initiative, that can demonstrate those kind of things.
Erin, thank you for that, Michelle. Erin, I know that the emphasis is more on the resume, but since we did mention cover letter, do you want to say something about cover letters? Because sometimes the resume is a difficult one to plug in something that's a soft skill or something that's more about the qualities, because resume tends to focus on activities and programs and something that you can actually touch and schedule. But maybe the cover letter is where you can add some of these things that Michelle talked about.
Yeah, and I think there will be an opportunity for a Sage Live on cover letters maybe later in the year. So I don't want to, steal the thunder, if you will, but that's a great way to sort of help somebody understand. We'll go back to the woodworking example of how woodworking and maybe the tools and skills that you learn really apply to the job that doesn't require that, requires something differently. So a cover letter is often a way that you can really connect the dots, if you will. Here is my experience, and here is my interest and why it relates to your position. And cover letters do not have to be 3 pages. They can be a paragraph. They can be 2 paragraphs. They don't, especially when you're starting out, you're not expected to write 7-paragraph essay on why you want this job. It's really just an ability to share a little bit more of why it's of interest to you. So if somebody in the organization, even if they're not in this department, but they shared with you their excitement for the job, you can put that in your cover letter. That's a great way to say, I have interest. I've talked with somebody, I saw on your website these projects. These are really interesting to me. That's something you would put in your cover letter. Some places will require a cover letter. And if they require a cover letter, you need to include a cover letter. Some places will not require a cover letter. It's okay to add it. To be honest, some people do not look at cover letters as much as they look at a resume. The resume is always the most important. But if a company or a job ad says submit a cover letter and a resume, then you should be submitting both the cover letter and the resume.
Erin, one last question. Are there things that you shouldn't do because something will kick you out or the system will kick you out?
I don't know about kick you out. There are sometimes if the job says you must have X and you don't have X, then you may not, they may not reach out to you. And that's where sometimes a cover letter, you might be able to say, although I don't have X, I've been able to learn about it and I'd like to, grow or I've had some exposure, that kind of a thing. This is all about increasing your chances of somebody looking at your resume and being interested in the next step for you to interview and to sell yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for that. If there's anything that I would take away from everything I've heard so far was what Anna said, especially for the high school students who you don't have the experience or maybe the coursework yet, but to just show that interest in the subject matter is so powerful, because a manager can say, I want someone who's coachable. I want someone who's willing to learn, and I want someone who's interested. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Erin, I have another question. Picture or picture? That's a question that we often get in New Mexico. Should we put our picture in our resume?
I would say no, you should not put your picture. You know, unfortunately in today's world, some folks will make judgments about a picture that they shouldn't make. And so really you want to focus on your skills. And so most employers, I've actually deleted somebody's photo before I would send it on to a hiring manager, because I want to make sure that the person gets a true fair shake.
Okay, so related to this, sorry for being a pain.
That's okay.
Should
You're
we
asking good
put
questions.
our identifiable first name? So should we sign as A.B. Gonzalez versus Antonio Gonzalez or Antonia Gonzalez?
So most applications are going to want you to put your legal name. Now, you know, I'm going to choose Amanda, and I'm picking on you, Amanda, because I have a cousin who is Mandy, but her legal name is Amanda. And so she puts Amanda on her resume, but then she signs it Mandy, because that's what her preferred name is. And so you do want to put your legal name. I don't think you should be concerned about changing the name as in terms of identifiers. Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that.
Just to fully understand, we're trying to avoid gender bias. Is that when we don't want to be identified as a?
I don't know if Anna was speaking to gender bias or ethnicity bias or what she was speaking to, but I would say, you know, put your legal name.
What about the pronouns?
So most applicant tracking tools are going to ask for gender and identity. Most companies hide that information from the individual hiring managers because it's not relevant to the job. So, you know, if you want to include pronouns, you're absolutely welcome to include your pronouns. I don't think that that should be a concern one way or another.
Very good. Erin, is it time to do case studies?
Sure. All right. So I'm going to share my screen, and Loy and I did test these. So I'm working off of a very large monitor. So I tried to make this big so that you guys can see it. So this is a resume. This is the before resume. And this was actually a resume that someone submitted from the SAGE program a few years ago that then I doctored. So it's Jane Doe, and the next one is Janet Doe. So I tried to take out a lot of identifiable information, but you'll see here this person, you know, included their elementary school, their middle school, their high school, and then they had some college. They also had, you know, all the volunteer work listed. And, you know, this is a resume that doesn't have bullets, but it has a consistent formatting to a certain extent. So it had all of that. It had extracurricular activities. And you can see, you know, this is quite elaborate for somebody who's currently in college, very beginning of college. So let's see if I can click over. No, I want this one. So you'll see my suggestions of, so this is in track changes. I didn't really change the format or anything, but I got rid of middle and high school. I rearranged that college, most recent, most relevant is first, and then high school. I subtracted all of the things here and kind of reorganized them so that it made it more relevant. So you'll see all those edits that I made, and then the greens are where I moved things. And so let me show you the after. And now it is a one-page document. And it highlights sort of the strength. You know, we've certainly reduced the education significantly. It still has a lot of the volunteer and work activities, and it was relevant to kind of the role. You don't have to list everything, or maybe you list everything and then when you're submitting it to a job, you reduce for that job. And then also the awards, you know, really focus on what's relevant. Now, could this been a 2-page resume or 1.5? Yes. There's no, there's not a, Loy asked this question of me before in our prep, you know, is there a page number requirement? And my answer is no. But you also don't want to list everything in a laundry list. This should be tailored for the job. Before I go on to the next one, does anyone have questions? No? Okay. I saw one shaking head, so I'm going with that. All right, so here is a different one. Again, you know, now I change it to Janet. And this person is just a high school student as of a few years ago. And so they had their achievements, activities, volunteer experience, skills, all of that listed here. So here, the reason why you're seeing all of this is I changed a bunch of the formatting as well, but I rearranged the achievements, reorganized, you'll see some of the activities, kind of refocused the volunteer experience. So I moved things a little bit differently based on relevancy and most recent on top in this case. And then also subtracted one of the skills because for this particular, I deemed it not relevant, but it may be relevant based on the position. And so here we have a 1-page, and so it still has, oh, I guess I left the proficiency. I changed it. What was it before? 9 years of art lessons, proficiency and da 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 da. I just made it proficiency in and left it as that. So again, this is sort of my take, you know, on taking somebody's resume, honing it to where I feel like it shows their best light. Still has strong volunteer, their activities. And so one of the things I did was instead of having 3 or 4 different bullets, we kind of all of their club activities went under one bullet to make it, you know, easier to read, grouped information, and then made it a little bit more of a 1-page resume, given the person at the time was still in high school. They've since graduated, this, you know, this Janet. So, and that's something, you know, again, I didn't really change the formatting from one to another. So if we look at, where's Jane's, this one, you know, she didn't have bullets. I didn't really make major edits to that. So it's not necessarily imposing my style preferences. It's really trying to make it a consistent document. I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has questions.
Erin, who would you suggest a person, a high school student, would approach to have them review their resume? A peer, a friend, a teacher, a parent?
So definitely have a peer look at it for sure. But I do think if you know somebody who works at an organization, or maybe you have an older sibling or an older peer who has gotten a job or who has already gotten into college, have them look at it as well. I say at minimum, you have 2 people look at it, because I can look at something and I'll just be very honest, you and your, when I type, I often mean your, but I type you and I read it and I read your, and it's there because that's what I'm intending. But somebody else will go, hey, Erin, you said you, and I think you want your. Oh my gosh, thank you. You know, those are silly things where you want to have somebody else catch that and not the employer, or not the hiring manager, you know, so always having somebody else look at it. You might have heard a trick is often to read it out loud and read it slowly. That helps, because when I do that, then I get the you and not the your that I intended. So that's also a good recommendation in terms of not only yourself doing an initial kind of read of it before you have a couple of other people look at it. Michelle, Anna, Scott, Loy, anything else you want to add in?
I was curious about the students' reaction to the 2 case studies. Was that kind of like, well, those were 2 high school students, and for me, initially, laundry list seems to make sense, but I guess there's a downside to just listing them all, trying to impress someone with the length of all the activities I've done throughout my 4 years of high school.
Yeah, because if you do have a long laundry list, you want it to be relevant, you know, so that's where that's where I call it a living document. You have your initial document with all the laundry list. And then when you go to apply to, you know, to UC Berkeley, then you tailor it for that. When you go to apply to Lawrence Livermore for a job, or when you go to apply to a specific internship, when you go to apply at Starbucks, at Jamba Juice, or wherever, you know, you want to tailor that a little bit. And in those cases, you might have a lot of the things where you've learned and grown, you know, so you're just gonna want to think about what's most relevant. You know, what does the job say is key and critical, and how can I highlight my skills that relate to that requirement?
You know, Erin, as you were talking, it made me think that if I had this laundry list of all the activities I do, and then I'm applying for like a Starbucks or whatever, I might be judged as being too busy. This person might not show up.
Potentially, yes. Maybe you'd get a question about that. So yeah, but you also want to show, you know, again, relevance.
Yeah, and hard work, I guess. It reflects hard work and enthusiasm for life.
Yeah. Michelle, you came off mute a minute ago. Did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that it's good to customize your resume for the job that you're applying for. This is not one of those situations where one size fits all. So I think it was Anna that said it earlier, but there are a lot of keywords. And if you look at the job posting, the job application, you could probably replicate and use some of those same keywords in your resume to just kind of highlight some of the things that are a match between yourself and the job that you're applying for.
Absolutely. Take their words, take their language. If you go to the ads department page and it says, you know, something in a certain way, use that.
Also, I wanted to add that things you're passionate about are important. Maybe I don't have a class in astronomy, but I love looking at the stars at night. I can label them and so on. And that shows, you know, your character. We not only hire a GPA, we also hire someone we can get along and someone who will fit in our department, right? If you're in your household, you know, you host international students, or if you like to travel, or you enjoy, you know, think about what these things in your life project about you. So I think that shows your character. So we, as hiring people, we want someone not only that we can impact or help grow. We also need someone who we can communicate, we can get along, we don't have misunderstandings, that the person is committed to tell us when something is wrong and it's not gonna just shut down, right? So help us, help us figure it out. Don't make us fish these characteristics in your resume. Don't make us guess. Oh, she worked at Starbucks. That means that she's outgoing, or whatever. Just help us a little bit.
And if I may, I'm sorry for adding too much, but also, I know these SAGE students, are collaborators. They do have problem-solving skills. They are curious. They do have a growth mindset. And so those are all really important things that you want to draw out in your resume as well. And SAGE is big and growing, and we're excited about all the growth we have, but a lot of employers don't know what SAGE is. And so if you're going to list SAGE on your resume, then describe a little bit about what type of a camp it is, that it's at SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory or Los Alamos or a national lab. That really carries a lot of weight. And that it's associated with the university systems, that we've already done these things of going projects, the things that interested you, and identify some of those things that might be a good match on your resume.
And I think once, we get to a cover letter discussion, really highlighting that as well, you can talk about something that you did in SAGE that really interests you and how it relates to the job or the university that you're applying to. That's where you really get the opportunity to say a little bit more about that.
I guess one thing I would add, following up on kind of the points that have been made already, this kind of goes more, I guess, to the interview skills, which would be obviously another talk. But when you're putting stuff on your resume, think about things that you're able to talk on and able to, what you're going to say about those, so that, this is basically what's going to initiate your conversation with the potential employer. And so, if you're able to, maybe it's not directly relevant to the job, but you can talk about it with passion and kind of show like that, this is how dedicated I am when I'm really interested in something, then that may be something you want to kind of highlight and put on there, so it initiates the conversation.
That's a great point, Scott, because you do want to be able to make sure that anything on your resume that you can speak to, that you know what it means, and that if they ask you for an example, that you have something at the ready. Anna, you were going to contribute as well?
I just mentioned it, what I thought it was worth pointing out for high school students is often, I also find that often it's hard to differentiate between one high schooler and another. Often we look for passion because we get resumes that are very generic. I like it all. I like bio, physics, chemistry, engineering. I like it all. And that doesn't help us, see if it would be a good match. So sometimes being a little bit more, when it comes to internships, a little bit more targeted is going to help you.
So when you save your, resume, and now I'm going to give you my personal opinion, okay? You always want to make it that your resume name has your name in it, right? Because then when I forward it on to somebody, it's easy. But you might also include SLAC internship or something that will help you later know, oh yeah, this is the one I used for that. So that when you're applying to another job and you're like, oh yeah, now I need to tailor it for this. Oh, wait a minute. When I applied to SLAC last year, I tailored it. I can use some of that same stuff. Now I'm going to add more because it's been a whole year and I've taken additional classes and done additional things. But for yourself, you want to, be able to use the resources that you had in the past. So, always save it with your name, but also for yourself, save it so that maybe it's Slack internship, or it's, New Mexico National Lab internship, or maybe even it's physics internship, something like that, that will also help you know that it's a little bit targeted.
So Erin, you suggest not just to put it in the file name, but actually in the document itself?
Oh, no, I meant in the file name.
Oh, okay.
I have folders, Erin. I have folders for every job I apply.
Yep.
In each folder, I have a copy of the job ad, a copy of the cover letter, and the CV I sent to that job specifically.
Yeah.
And the reason is, if you are called for an interview, you want to know what you submitted. So saving those resumes is important, right? And in particular, if you apply, there was someone that was in college already and might be applying to different programs and so on. You might be changing your resume for each program you apply. So let's keep a record of all those programs and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And, have your own personal, whether you keep it in the cloud, where you keep it on a thumb drive, wherever you keep it, have that saved for yourself. And it does show when somebody comes in from an interview and they have the job description right there with them, and they're talking with me and they're reviewing it, and you can see that they know what they're applying for. I appreciate that. I appreciate as an employer that they've done their homework. This isn't a case of what job was it? Who did I apply to? What am I here for? It shows somebody's organized and somebody's prepared. And that goes a long way.
I think that statement applies to college applications too. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
You're like, okay, what college am I talking to right now?
For sure. Yeah, and by the way, Anna mentioned CV, so curriculum vitae. And those are often, some people use resume and CV interchangeable. Typically, a CV is used more in an academic or related area. So at my last company, I hired the most people I hired were PhDs, and they all had their CVs, and they listed all their publications. And depending upon their level, they listed everybody who they'd been a postdoc advisor for, and they'd, so it's a little bit different format than just your traditional resume. So for now, you guys will go with a resume, but eventually, depending upon what you do, you might shift over to a CV, and some of it is similar in format, and then it's a lot more in depth and involved.
Erin, we have a question from Amy.
Sorry, no.
Applying for college, how many colleges should we apply to, and should we use the same resume?
So I think you can answer the question on the same resume, and that's a no. You should probably tailor it, unless you're applying to a neurobiology program at every school, then yes, it might be the same. But if you're applying to slightly different programs, then you might highlight that differently. And I don't know the answer. I'm truly not a college admissions person, so I can't speak to how many you should apply to. I don't want to give any advice on that. I don't think I'm a good example of that. So yeah. If anyone else can speak to that or give recommendations, please do, but I don't feel qualified to comment on that piece.
So Amy and Alyssa, I'm just curious, are you sophomores or juniors right now? Or are you in the college application mode?
We're sophomores. We were just curious because it's come up a lot in our school.
Yes, and that is, yeah, and then every school has its own college and career center that's more active or less active, and so it's an excellent question. Lisa, being the only college student here, can probably share what she did when she applied to colleges and then landed at UC Berkeley. But I'm also wondering, if at some point, no, go ahead, Lisa, if you want to share, and then I will follow on with my next comment.
Personally,
What were you told and what did you do?
for our school, I think our college counselors said recommended no more than 10 schools, I think, because that's like a lot. It's like too much. Like you won't be able to put that much effort into each one. So that was our high school. That's what they recommended. But personally, I applied to, I think, 13, but yeah. So, but it definitely depends on what you want to do, and like, because for me, every college was a different major. So if you're thinking about like having more majors, I feel like, I don't know, it really depends on your personal preferences. So
Thank you for your comment, Lisa. For our high school students here, please check with your college and career centers. And most high schools have subscribed to a program called Naviance. And starting from freshman year, you can already go into Naviance because it starts with self-assessment, knowing who you are, knowing what your interests are. And then as you go through the years, by the time you go to senior year, if you've been using Naviance, it gives you information on different options to match your interest so that you're applying to schools that are likely to be a good fit with what you like. I'm almost wondering now that perhaps one of our future Sage Live topics will be college applications or college admissions, because we all come from different schools, and different schools might also have different resources. And some students might not need it because they get a lot of support, but others might need it as well. So
In the summer physics camp for young women, we of course we are 2 weeks long, right? But we bring the local admissions people on the last day to talk to the students. So they always say your first resource is the school counselor, and student admissions are there to support you, right? For the colleges. So they are a resource, and you should not be shy of asking questions to them. Even if your school counselor doesn't answer to you satisfactorily, then there are other resources. And if not, always reach out to us and we can put you in touch with people at other universities that can give you that working student admissions, right? So for those in California, if you don't want to talk to the admissions in your California college, we can put you in touch with people in other colleges that can give you their feedback.
yeah, thank you for that, Anna. I've seen the college admissions presentations in the camp that Anna hosts in New Mexico. And it's very, very informative, and it's very different. The New Mexico university system is very different than the California university system. So there's definitely a lot of options available to all, especially for those who are willing to travel to different parts of the country or different parts of the world for higher education.
Well, and I think, this highlights, it's the same thing that we're talking about for resumes in terms of what does the job description ask for? What does it want from somebody? And so when you tailor your resume, you're doing that. If it's a college application process, same thing. If they're asking for certain stuff, you want to address those key and critical things that UC Berkeley might ask for, different than Stanford, different than, New Mexico State University. So you really, want to make sure that you're almost like a checklist of, okay, they asked for this, did I address that? They've asked for this, did I address that? So I think regardless of where you apply, that's key and critical.
Great. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
I don't know if it was said because my phone died, but do a grammar check on your resumes. Did Erin bring it up? Always ask someone else to read over it, because it often, it shows something when there are grammar mistakes in something that you turn in to a hiring agent.
Yeah, I did. I recommended multiple people look at it and to read it out loud even.
Thank you. Sorry, my phone died, so I don't know.
No,
if
no,
anyone
that's
knows.
quite all right. Yes, I think it's always good to reinforce that because you don't want to, get your resume to the no pile because of something silly like a typo. Because there are words like I could go back to my you and your, those are both real words, Y-O-U, Y-O-U-R, but they have different meanings. And so I don't want it to end up in the no pile because I didn't reread it or ask somebody else to read it. So those are things you always want to make sure that you do.
Erin, Mia is asking, is there anything else specific to avoid on a resume?
Well, it's a little bit in the slides from before in terms of, verb tense, spelling errors, but beyond that, being as specific as possible and making sure that it is a true reflection of you, I think is most important.
Thank you for bringing that up. In the end, it really does reflect who you are, right?
Yes.
You cannot put in there something, if you're trying to game the system, it will not be helpful because you end up in an organization that you're not happy with because it's not who you are. So you have to be authentic.
And your fonts should be consistent, go through and do a control all and make sure that you might have your headings a little bit bigger and then everything else the same size. Check that out. I am not a fan of the pretty fonts, the italics. It just makes it harder to read. I really think about that.
I agree with that, Erin. Hey, Erin, here's a question. If you're applying to your first internship, is it bad to not have any previous internship experiences? You don't have any because it's your first one.
And that's okay. You always have to be, there's always going to be the first job, and so maybe you haven't had an internship before, but you have had, I'm going to make it up, this was me, babysitting jobs. And I'm sharing way too much information, but my relatives are farmers in Indiana. So I would spend my summers in Indiana working on the farm. I don't know that that shows too much necessarily relevance when I went for my first job, except it shows persistence and willing to be in the hot sun in Indiana in the summer. So, but I think that, yes, it's okay. You always have to, there's got to be a first. And that is especially key where you're going to want to make sure you highlight your interest in there and anything relevant. If it is if you've taken a biology class and it's an internship in biology, highlight all the skills that you have and the things that you really are interested in. Because remember, your internships not only show you what you like, but they will also show you what you don't like. So it's valuable information to get. And working at Starbucks, I worked in a retail environment. Those are all relevant skills too.
Yeah, I want to thank Charlotte for that question because it does lead us to the closing of this session. For Lisa specifically, who's already in college, we have the community college internships and also the science undergraduate, SULI, S-U-L-I, science undergraduate internship. And the deadline for that is January 12th. So please look into that if you're interested. And for the high school students, it's something to look forward to. And there are also high school internships that for 2022, if you want to look at the material that we covered in our last month's Sage Live. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Anna just asked about references, and I would say I am not typically somebody who puts references on my resume. And I'll be very honest, if you write references available upon request, just take those 2 lines out because of course, if they ask for references, you're going to provide them. So if they ask for them to be included, then you would want to include them. Otherwise, you don't need to list references on your resume. That's my 17.5 cents are my recommendation.
I guess the bottom line there is follow the instructions so you don't get kicked out, or that there's some rules that they're hung up on, then just do it, right? And that's probably true for applying for internships. Follow the rules in the application process. And very important, let us know if you're applying for an internship, because as Anna said, it is very driven by the hiring managers and the mentors. So if we know what you're looking for, we can help you. So with that, I want to thank Erin. Thank you so much for joining us today and being our speaker. Yeah, Scott, let's give Erin a big hand. I want to thank our SAGE community, Joanna, Anna, Michelle, Scott, for being here, taking your Saturday morning with us, and for the students. You did this for yourself. That's part of self-care. You do what you need to do to help you along the way to your SAGE journey. Join us next month for more information about STEM careers at different labs, and in January for preparing for an interview. I will stop the recording now.
Thank you, guys. I've enjoyed this. Thanks for all the great questions and for others contributing and adding.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.